illegal immigrants who were voting, and that was checked by staff in Utah. It's offensive to say to anybody who's a legitimate American citizen or Utah citizen that actually protecting your vote is somehow disenfranchising you.
Welcome out to God and Country. We have a great guest with us today, Karianne Lisonbee, the Majority Whip of the Utah Congress. How are you doing today?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
That's excellent. We love having you on board. You've been an incredibly busy woman the last few weeks and few months. I've read up quite a number of news articles on you, and you're packing it in, for sure.
I try to make the minutes count.
Yeah, well, kind of tell us a little bit of an introduction of yourself, where you come from, where you were raised. Most importantly, kind of let us know kind of your morals and values, how those developed, and then how you process those as a politician now.
All right. I prefer not politician, but stateswoman. But I mean, I try to be a good public servant, and but I'll get into that as I go along. But I'll just start with I grew up in mostly Nebraska and some in Massachusetts, but I grew up in poverty, and it was an interesting upbringing, and but I had family members who, in their hearts, are good people who are trying to do good things. My father is a Vietnam War veteran, and anyway, I learned from an early age to trust in my Savior Jesus Christ and in my Heavenly Father for the things that I needed. And my faith has just carried me through in my life and been such a strength and a power for me. And that's where I've really developed a lot of my principles. But I would say, like, when I was 13 years old, I got my first job. And so in the summer, I went in the fields every day and I detasseled corn. And if you've ever done that or heard about it, it is the hardest job. It is so hard. So as a 13-year-old girl, I was walking back and forth through rows of corn, pulling off the tops of corn as I went miles and miles in the heat with spiders and corn smut and mud. And it, my brother actually tried to do it and quit after one day. And I did it for 3 summers and earned money so that I could buy clothes to go to school. And so, like, I just became, I developed a work ethic, and I became determined to have a better life than what I had when I was younger. And one of the biggest inspirations for me, and you'll probably laugh, but you probably don't even know this. So my favorite books, I read voraciously, but my favorite books that I read over and over again when I was young were the Little House series. And I was like, I want to be like Caroline, like Ma Ingalls. She was amazing, just such a firm hand, but loving and with principle and God-fearing. And so I really looked to those books as a kind of modeling and way to pattern my life. So then I came out, I was a first generation college attendee and graduate. I came out to BYU, and there I met my husband, Seth, and he's from Scipio, Utah. So we'd settled down here, and we raised 6 kids, and I homeschooled my 6 kids K through 12. And while I was homeschooling them, really dug into American history, of course, and we read all of the great classics together, but we also read a lot about the founders and the Constitution, and we discussed and engaged. And I brought my little kids to Second Amendment rallies with little signs with Benjamin Franklin quotes. And so, I mean, I've been a patriot at heart, I think my whole life, just knowing that God really founded and created this country to be a place where his people could then learn of him and dedicate their lives to him and serve around the world. And America has made the world a better place. I firmly believe that. And I'm grateful that I can have a part in helping to make Utah a better place.
Well, we're grateful to have you here in Utah. You've done a lot of really, really good things. Were your parents very religious at all growing up, or is that faith in Jesus Christ is something that kind of was born within you?
So my mother was religious, and so she brought me to church, and while I was attending church is where I really developed a testimony of my Savior Jesus Christ. And then my mom ended up leaving the church and religion, but she eventually came back.
Tell us a little bit about how you first came into anything to do political. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
It's when we met.
Yes, it was. So I was minding my own business like a good girl. And I was minding my own business and, busy homeschooling my children and creating a home for our family. And in our city, there was this mayor who was elected, and there started to just be a lot of contention, and it was just bubbling up over the surface, and it just became a topic of conversation everywhere we went, right? Like at the grocery store, at the gas station, everybody was like, oh, how about that new mayor and blah, blah, blah. And so I'm curious and I want to know for myself what's happening in my city. And so I started attending city council meetings. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to be attending, I should probably, and this was back in the day when it was like blogging was just starting. And so I thought, well, I'll just blog what's happening in our city. And so I started making notes about what was happening at the meetings. And I just tried to relay the information without any emotion, but just here's the agenda. Here's what was discussed. Here's kind of what I think. And then another gentleman started coming to the meetings, Craig. And he said, why don't we put up a website? So we put up a website, and then we were like, well, we should start a Facebook page. So we started a Facebook page, and we just started informing. And I was working in my garden one day. I have a big garden, and we grew a lot of our own food and canned it, and it was great having 6 kids. You have an assembly line. It's wonderful. Now it's harder to can because I don't have the assembly line. But no, it was great. It was great fun teaching my kids how to work and where their food came from. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us. Anyway, so I'm minding my own business. And then Leah Shingleton, who was a friend, a mutual friend, walks into my backyard, walks into my garden and says, hey, we had a meeting last night and we decided you need to run for city council.
I forgot you weren't at that meeting.
I was not.
But we did. It was unanimous.
My first question to her was, who's we? Who's having a meeting and not inviting me and then deciding this big thing? So I said that I would think about it and pray about it. And she left and I did. And I felt like I should run, but I went back and I said, I will run if Craig, this other gentleman, will run who had started all of this with me. And he agreed. And so we both ran for city council, and we were able actually to kind of flip the council to be more conservative. We needed those seats filled, those 2 seats. And so we were the top 1 and 2 vote getters, and we spent 4 years working hard in Syracuse. He decided not to run again. I chose to run for re-election and won again and served for 2 years and then was asked to run for the House and have been in the House now. This is my 9th year.
Yeah, you've been in there for quite a while. It's kind of interesting about your going back to your corn story, how that type of hard early labor really puts in a good work ethic for you. I mean, that's how I grew up was my parents had us doing a lot of hard labor around the yard and stuff like that. We couldn't get out of it. And then as my kids grew up, I had money, but at the same time I wasn't hiring people to come do stuff, and I forced them to go out there and work because I knew what it did for me. Because you can't replace that work ethic. There's a lot of entitlements nowadays. A lot of kids that just kind of grow up on the video games and they just expect everything to be given to them. They get to college and get even more entitled, and it really creates a bad society when you have that. And so to have people grow up with that type of work ethic, because it's not just a work ethic, it teaches you a lot of humility and teaches you to appreciate what you have. So there's a little bit of gratitude there, and I think that's the other part about being entitled is you're just not grateful for anything. And if you're not grateful for your home or your schooling or anything like that, how are you going to be grateful for the country itself? And then that's where the nitpicking starts, where we're not good enough, and everybody just starts picking the country apart. And it's really that sense of ingratitude. When you started running for Congress, kind of walk through how the fundraising started and how you all of a sudden got to where the whole area would pay attention to you. What made it so that you were able to win that election?
Well, I think I had already really developed a following unintentionally, but I actually raised over $20,000 in my first city council election, which is a lot for a city like Syracuse, just by going around and asking people for 50 or 100, like whatever they could give. And I was able to raise that much money to buy signs and to get a flyer. And then I knocked almost every door in the city.
She still does that.
And I still do. Even in off years, I will go and knock doors because I find that it's a really good gut check for, hey, what is everybody thinking? What are the issues that are important to you? And I think we get kind of in this policy space where we're not looking outward. It's really myopic and not helpful. And so I think really connecting with the people in my district is important. I hold a lot of town halls too.
How big is your district? Because it's not just Syracuse now.
It isn't. I have knocked almost every door in Clearfield as well. And I have a little tiny bit of Layton, and I've also knocked that area. And there's some good people. I love that area. They're down to earth. Anyway, my district is pretty much everything from the Causeway to I-15 up to 193 and then Gordon. So those are kind of
And then she'll go knock for Trevor. She'll go knock for Rod.
I knocked
knocks
for Trevor
for good people.
And Rod and gave them both a lot of money and endorsements.
And that's how that's the reason why people vote for you is when you get out there and have that personal touch, that personal connection, all of a sudden you become human. There's a face to a name. And then they kind of feel something for that. And they feel like, well, they do understand us. They do know where we're coming from, the principles we stand for. And if you don't have that personal touch, then it's hard to get elected. And I think a lot of the bigger national elections, they lose that. They don't have that personal touch. It's particularly on the Democrat side, they kind of lose track of what the normal people want. It's one big reason why the Democrats have lost their standing right now. They've just kind of lost touch with society. And I don't know how much of that's going to hold out for another 2 years because we have a very, very short memory in this country. Very, very short memory. I was watching some polls coming out today that's already showing it starting to come back to the Democrat side, which is troubling. But still, it's good that people get out there and have that personal touch. Outside of your district, have you had much communication with people that have come up to you or sent you information about helping around the other parts of the state?
Yeah. So I am known as just being very responsive, which was my goal when I got into elected office. I'm a reluctant elected official, but a very wholehearted public servant. And I'd like to explain that. I have many things that I could do with my life outside of public service, but I am all in when it comes to preserving our freedoms, increasing personal responsibility, and creating a framework where people can live their lives to their fullest and best and create equal opportunity for everybody. And so I am constantly getting text messages from people all over the state who I've had the honor to be introduced to and to get to know through serving in public office. And it's really a joy to be able to connect them with stakeholders who can help, or, they bring me ideas for legislation. Hey, I was talking to my neighbor and this came up. Or like yesterday, I was sitting on the couch next to Katie Hall at this meeting, and Representative Hall and I got a text about a potential bill that was a really good idea. And I showed her and she goes, hey, we should get this on the interims, we should get it on the interim list. We should make a motion. And the process is, in the interim first meeting, you can make a motion to basically create a bill file and work on something through the interim, and it fast tracks that legislation. And this happened to be just a really good idea. She was like, I'll do it. I'm on that committee. Let's get that going. And so basically those things happen all the time. And that was not a constituent of mine, but it was just something that came to me and from somebody else. So,
how do you guys decide which ones will be addressed in the interim? I know that we need to address the illegal immigrant voting in our state. Is that something that will be addressed in interim?
So I'm currently actually pushing to try to get that on special session agenda for May, to get that fixed now. I don't think that's something we have the luxury of waiting to act on personally. And it's already drafted. It's already, we've already had discussions with county clerks and other elected officials, and they might not like the approach. I'm obviously willing to discuss and amend as needed, as long as we're getting to what looks like the right answer, and that is we are precluding illegal immigrants from voting and canceling out the votes of legitimate Utah citizens. And so the process, though, in interim is interesting because the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate get together. They take the list of topics that everybody in the House and Senate have submitted, and then they go through and assign them out to committees and decide. Sometimes they'll be like, we don't really need to study that this interim, maybe next interim. But in general, they just assign out. But the other thing is, the first interim meeting, you'll see a lot of motions to add things to the list that weren't part of that because people forgot or something came up yesterday, right? And so, that's a really good idea. We should put that on the interim agenda. And so I actually have a list of about 6 things for one of my committees where I want to add the first meeting in May. But that's the process.
So in this special session coming up, going back to that voter fraud, are we going to be able to trace the money or who's responsible for this?
For
allowing illegal voters to be voting? And
that's a really good question. So first of all, we don't know for sure that there will be a special session. We do know that there are some bills that need to be fixed, and that the governor has indicated he would like to call us into special session to fix those policies. But I am not 100% sure that that's going to happen, and so I don't want to get out over my skis and say for sure there's going to be one. But to your second question, can we follow what has happened? I don't know that we can really just point to any one person in the state and say it's their fault. What has happened is you have the NVRA, which is the National Voting Rights Act, which is federal law, and then you have Utah law. And I will tell you, and this is interesting because Trevor also did this, and then a representative in Utah County also did this, where a few years ago it's like, how do we keep illegal immigrants from voting in Utah? And so I reached out to my clerk, Brian McKenzie, and he told me, it can't happen in Utah. It's impossible. And here's why. We have this process where we ping against the driver's license database, and then and so I called the director of the driver's license division, and I asked him, so how does this process work? And are there any loopholes? And absolutely not. Nobody can vote in the state of Utah. But there were several blind spots. And I'm not pointing fingers saying, okay, it's their fault that this is happening. I'm just saying there are several blind spots there. And one of them is that not everybody that's an illegal immigrant has the driver's privilege card or a driver's license. Some illegal immigrants have full-fledged driver's licenses, That's because the federal government has given them documentation that allows them to obtain one. But the driver's license division in their database has a field for citizenship. And if you have citizenship documents at the time you obtain a driver's privilege card or a driver's license, they are filled out in that citizenship document. Well, nobody that gets a driver's privilege card, correct that, has citizenship documentation. But if you have a driver's license, obviously, and you're an American citizen, you do. So you would have information in that field. And when the clerks ping against that, it would come back as their citizenship or not. So there's two issues. Only about 30% of illegal immigrants obtain a driver's privilege card. That means 70% do not, which there's a large number of people out there who don't have a driver's privilege card, which means that if the county clerks ping, nothing comes back. It's not that it's no citizenship documents, it's nothing, which means, and this was a subsequent conversation that happened, information about illegal immigrants who are voting, and that was checked by staff in Utah, and they said, well, this person actually did have a driver's privilege card, this particular person. They should not have been allowed to register or vote, and they had been voting in Utah elections for 4 years. And so I had a meeting with the clerks the next week. I was sitting across from them. I said, how does this happen? And they said, well, really, we just treat the check the box on the registration form that says I attest I'm a citizen as proof of citizenship.
Perfect.
And I said, so I'm confused because filling out the form as a non-citizen is a felony. Checking the box is a felony. What makes us think that committing one felony is going to then say, oh, but I wouldn't dare go and commit this other felony of checking this box. We should be verifying citizenship documents. And so I put in HB 332 language that actually creates a process in code where the clerks have to verify citizenship. And if they cannot, and this is what Arizona does, there's two separate voter lists. There's a federal election only because the NVRA does say that states cannot preclude people from voting in federal elections if they don't have citizenship documentation. So we have a federal election database and we have a state election database. Anybody on this database can vote in any election in the state. Anybody on this database can only vote for federal elections. And then we went a step further and we said, if you're on this database and we do find proof that you are not a citizen, we will remove you, because the NVRA does say if we have proof that they're not a citizen, we can remove them from this list. So that is what Arizona does and has been doing for many years. And so there's no reason we cannot do that in Utah other than perhaps political will or, but in my mind, our Constitution in the state of Utah says that non-citizens shall not be allowed to vote. And I cannot in good conscience say that I am upholding my oath of office to the Utah Constitution and the national Constitution if I am then violating that provision in the Constitution by knowingly allowing non-citizens to vote in this state.
This might sound really naive, but do you expect pushback?
I've already had a lot of pushback, there's this weird set of talking points coming from the left that somehow putting language like this into code will disenfranchise legitimate voters. And my argument back has been, there is no reason that a citizen of America cannot present citizenship documents to vote. We may have to go down to the health department and get a copy of a birth certificate. We may have to write to our original state where we were born and get a copy of our birth certificate and then drive it down to the clerk and present it in person with a picture ID. But voting means something in this country and in this state. And it is important enough to me that I would be willing to do that. And I think it should be important enough to everybody in the state for everybody to be willing to verify citizenship if they have not already done so. And I will say that everybody with a driver's license in the state of Utah has already verified citizenship, because you cannot get a driver's license without it unless you're an illegal immigrant, and then that field is empty.
Well, I want to make sure that happens, obviously, because illegals definitely should not be voting, because that could very easily kind of skew our elections completely the wrong direction, which is what the left has been planning this entire time. The entire purpose of having that southern border open was to import future voters. I mean, they had no other purpose other than that. They didn't care about crime. They don't care about U.S. citizenship. All they care about is, I want to stay in power. We're not getting enough votes, so let's just keep the votes importing. And you can see that from the efforts that they put together to get the illegals up here, from the app to actual instructions on how to get up here provided by USAID. There was U.S. citizens down there helping them get through Mexico and stuff like that, people that are paid by USAID to help people immigrate up here. So it wasn't just the cartels that were helping immigrants get up here. I mean, we had actual U.S. people down there helping, and then that's proven all over the internet. As you guys get into this topic, and let's kind of finish this topic too, because then we can drop back to your candidacy and stuff like that. But one of the main things that DOJ came up with is they found that within 4 or 5 months of a lot of these illegals hitting the border, the Biden administration was handing out Social Security numbers and benefits just right out the gate. And I want to go to this clip that's up on Fox just so we can have that.
Elon Musk and the DOJ team tackling fraud in Social Security, vowing to end schemes that are draining taxpayer dollars.
As the saying goes, the wheels of justice turn slowly but surely. And I think probably the person that stole 400,000 Social Security numbers, at least, maybe more, will be arrested hopefully this week.
In 21, you see 270,000 people, goes all the way to 2.1 million in 24. These are non-citizens that are getting Social Security numbers.
Yeah, this is a mind-blowing chart.
We went there to find fraud, and we found this by accident.
All right. Valor CEO and DOJ volunteer Antonio Gracias, the guy you just saw, was just with Musk in Wisconsin over the weekend. He joins us from the North Lawn. Antonio, good morning to you.
Good morning, Steve.
That's a jaw-dropping number. Where did all those people come from?
Well, it made my jaw drop too when I saw it. We were in Social Security looking for fraud, waste, and abuse. And to do that, we actually looked at the enumeration system, the system by which people get numbers in America. And we found that there were just about 5+ million of them that came to the country as illegals, were giving various forms of parole or allowed in the country, and they got through an automatic system, Social Security numbers, so they get into our benefit systems. And we tracked that through and found that they were on the benefit programs. And just because we were curious, we then looked to see if they were on the voter rolls. And we found in a handful of cooperative states that there were thousands of them on the voter rolls, and that many of them had voted.
That's crazy, because you cannot vote in a federal election, but I think in certain local elections you can. But once you get a Social Security number, that helps you do a lot of stuff. I know, Antonio, part of this started with a program from, I think, 2017 that got started, where if people came into the country and they were authorized to work, they would automatically give them a number. But, Elon was talking a little bit about how 400,000 Social Security numbers were stolen. It was one person. What can you tell us about that?
That's an ongoing investigation, so I don't know how much I can tell you, but we did find, as we looked through the programs, a particular employee that had actually sent themselves Social Security numbers through their email for reasons we don't understand, but clearly nefarious.
So they had one employee that stole 400,000 names, and they don't understand why. I very easily understand why, because I'm, like I said in the last podcast, my wife's Latin, and I'm heavily connected in the Latin community, and Social Security numbers sell for a lot in the Latin community. They just do. Not to diss on my wife, but when she first arrived in the country, she had a bunch of her friends offer her one, because she came in as a political refugee because of a assassination attempt on one of the politicians that she was working for back down in Colombia. And then she got up here and she was trying to get a job. She was going to school and stuff like that. And they gave her one, and it was another guy, was a dead guy or something like that, was much, much older. So and she had lots of offers when she was down in Florida of selling her Social Security numbers. So it's a big, big market out there to buy and sell these Social Security numbers. And so when you have someone that's inside the system that's sending themselves 400,000 of them, it means someone's gotten to that individual, found out that they work for the Social Security Administration, have access to those type of things, and said, hey, we'll pay you so much if you can get us some. And then they just get sold out in the black market. That's just how it works. But the scary thing about this is 5 million illegals had Social Security numbers and were purposely put on the benefits programs, Medicare, Medicaid, whatever it was. And you know that they do that on purpose. Why? Because that's how they buy the vote. I mean, you get people hooked on that type of subsistence, and you've got their vote forever. So it's not just the fact that they're illegals and coming into the country, but if I get them on food stamps and WIC and all these other programs, I've got a permanent voter. And that was the whole point of the Biden administration. They needed those extra voters because they knew they had a problem going into that next election. He wasn't popular. There was indications very, very early on that he was not going to win the election. Even when it got switched over to Kamala, they knew what the polls were. They were denying him, and Kamala was denying him, but people in the back offices, and those have all leaked. And I've seen a lot of those videos where they knew that she wasn't going to win. The polls were heavily against her. And so their only hope was the illegal and fraudulent voting and the abortion right. That was their only hope. And neither one of those went through. But still, they were in hopes that this type of stuff wasn't going to come out, that people weren't going to find out that they, in fact, have 5 million. I'm surprised there was only 5 million. I'm sure if they kept on looking, it's going to come out to be a lot more than that are on the voter rolls. But going back to your driver's license statement, is once you have that Social Security number, you have an address, you have all this kind of stuff, you can go out and get a driver's license. Because I don't know if I haven't checked, but in the state of Utah, it's not required that you produce a birth certificate.
That is one of the issues that will be ongoing as we're trying to also collaborate with the federal government to ensure that we can compare databases. So, for instance, because of that action by the Biden administration, we have to be able to compare against Social Security number database, because if we don't do that, we will not know which Social Security numbers are attached to citizenship documentation and which aren't. And that is proprietary within that database that states do not have access to right now. And so we're trying to figure out a way to collaborate, not so that we can see the database, but so that we can compare our database to it in a way that gives us information back, so that as soon as we get a process in place, we can ensure that those people are removed.
How do we tie that to a birth certificate? I mean, everybody has to have a birth certificate. It's not really hard to get one. And I hate the whole argument that you're disenfranchising people, because anybody out there can go out and get an ID. It doesn't even have to be a driver's license. You can go out and get an ID. So don't be afraid about passing the driver's test. You can go out and get a state ID. Anybody can go get their birth certificate. You can order those things by mail now, even if you're not in the same state anymore. I've gone out and had to redo my kids because we lost those years ago and had to go get them all over again. So I know the process. It's not hard to go out and get any of these documents. And the one thing that really I hate about that is when they start ragging on the black population. Says, well, you're going to disenfranchise the blacks. You're going to disenfranchise the Latin community. And it's almost like treating them like they're incapable of going out and getting these things, like they're too naive or
clearly they're not allowed into those offices,
or too stupid to be able to figure out how to do that. And I think that is demeaning against the minority populations. But we know for a fact that that's not the end goal. The whole point of them making those arguments isn't because they believe that those arguments are true. They're just trying to make an uproar with society based on those arguments, because in the back of their minds, they know what they want. They don't want the illegals off the voter rolls. Why? Because they skew Democratic, and that's how they're going to get their voters. So how do we fix, or how do we attach that to actual birth certificates?
Right. And I think, to go back, additionally, it's offensive to say to anybody who's a legitimate American citizen or Utah citizen that, actually protecting your vote is somehow disenfranchising you. That is not the case. When somebody can vote in an election who is not a citizen or who is fraudulently on the voter rolls, then it cancels out the vote of a legitimate citizen, and that's not right. I think it's important. I'm working on policy in another bill that I helped Representative Lee with during the session, and that bill he ended up abandoning at the end of session on purpose so that we could have a broader discussion about the policy. And so since the session, I've held multiple meetings on that policy with Representative Lee and with other stakeholders to make sure that we get it right. And so just so that your listeners know, Utah has some of the most permissive language in code with regards to when somebody goes to register to vote, what kind of documentation is required in order to register to vote. Utah is quite permissive in that regard. And so we're aiming to fix that in cooperation with some federal partners who have reached out, including Judicial Watch, which is a third-party group who has threatened lawsuit against our law because it is so lenient, and there is plenty of case law surrounding that shows that a suit would be successful if it were brought. And so I've made that a priority also for the special session and been in communication with the governor to make sure that we can get that bill on the agenda in order to preclude the lawsuit from happening, so that we're not spending taxpayer dollars defending against something we know we can fix and we know what the problem is.
Well, how far back does our law go that made it so easy to get on the voter rolls? I mean,
this was all done before I was in the legislature.
do you know the history of that, how far back that law goes at all? No?
I do not, unfortunately. I have not extensively worked in the election space. I have worked on it minimally throughout the years, trying to make fixes and, like I said, asking questions and trying to find out, how. For instance, I asked our county clerk, how are dead people removed from the voter rolls? And I was told there are no dead people on the voter rolls. They are removed immediately within 2 weeks. Well, then we had an audit in December 2024 that showed that there actually were 1,400 dead people on the voter rolls last year, or for the 2023 election, and that actually 3 of those dead people, was it 2 or 3? I can't remember now. I think it was 3 actually voted in the election, and they were dead before they received their ballot. So I'm not sure how that happened, other than
I'm sure it's pretty. I'm pretty sure it's really permissive in other states as well. I'm positive that's
So
going to happen. I know friends in other states that said they were getting several ballots in the mail.
Yes.
One of my friends out in California said he got his ballots plus the previous owners and the previous owners to that household. 3 owners later, there were still sending the ballots to one house.
Correct. So my son that lives in Arkansas moved out of the state about 7 years ago and registered to vote in Arkansas, and we receive a ballot for him every year. And I've complained about this for multiple years, and we got a ballot for him.
Why are we mailing
last
out
year.
ballots still? Why don't we just go back to in-person voting?
So we did have a bill that would allow for the mailing out of the ballots, but would require the voter to return the ballot with an ID. It was HB 300, and that's the way the policy started out. But because of negotiations, we had to pull back significantly on that policy to even get anything passed. And so now it's extremely...
What's stopping that? Because I think mail-out ballots is like the worst
We are
possible
the only
scenario,
blue
the biggest
state,
piece of
or
fraud.
the only red state among 7 blue states that has a universal vote by mail system. We're the only red state.
I know. How did that even happen? Because there's nothing more fraudulent than a mail-in balloting. I mean, you
there
can't
is
not
risk of fraud,
be tempted
right?
to abuse that.
Right. And it's chain of custody issues generally. And so when I was on the city council is when it happened. And in Syracuse, we fought it, and we actually voted to conduct our elections differently with voter machines at the city building rather than contract with the county when I was on the council, because at that time, vote by mail was a pilot program, and we were allowed to do that. But fairly soon after that, it was made basically mandatory statewide. So it was
Who
before
made that mandatory? How did that
the
pass?
legislature before my time.
Before time? So it's been in there for a while. So we just, yeah, I don't know how that passed in such a conservative state, because that increases the likelihood of fraud to almost 100%.
Yes, but if like HB 300, I felt was a particularly brilliant policy when it was first introduced, because it allows people to get their ballot by mail, which then you can do your research and take your time and look through the candidates. And that was one of the benefits that so many people pointed to, and they said they liked vote by mail. But then when they go to return it, and we know that about 70% of Utah voters return their vote by mail ballot to a drop box. So what we had instituted in the bill was you go to a drop box, you have to show an ID to return your ballot. Simple. Then you can't return a ballot that isn't yours. You have to have ID to be able to return a ballot. That's how we used to do elections, and that's how we should go back to doing elections. But unfortunately, that is not how, that is not the language we were able to get passed.
Who in the Congress or who in the Senate is not for that? What's stopping something like that from progressing? Because that should be fairly easy in a predominantly Republican state.
It's a good question. It wasn't my bill, and I wasn't involved in the negotiations, so I cannot name names or point fingers. I just know there was a tremendous amount of pushback.
Is it on the House side or is it more on the
There
Senate
was
side?
some on the House side and some on the Senate side.
Because we have Stuart Adams coming in a couple weeks. I'm going to ask him the same question.
I think that I do think that Stuart actually supported the bill, but you'll have to ask him. But I'm fairly certain that he supported it in its original form. So, but that would
That's
be a good
good.
question to ask him.
Well, Stuart and I were neighbors,
Okay.
so I know him quite well. Kind of continuing this same conversation, hitting the news here.
Yeah.
You're beginning to rolling out public safety and immigration bills ahead of the session. There's a lot of ideas that have come out from Candace Perucci, I guess, that from Harriman. Criminal penalties for those who commit crimes that are illegal, increasing those penalties,
You wanna
helping
talk
schools
about
that
that
have
bill?
more than average English learners, which would obviously, I mean, there's a lot that goes into this. So how much of this is in discussions right now, and how much of this do you think is going to go through?
So we worked throughout the 2024 interim session on this package of bills, and it was a lot of work. We had a lot of meetings, and Representative Perucci and I chaired a task force. And I have constituents in my area who are concerned about this issue, who we're seeing increased numbers of auto accidents and unsafe driving from illegal immigrants who come here. They don't get a license. They are driving on our roads, causing accidents. It sometimes without insurance. So then, your personal insurance rates will very likely increase if you're making a claim. So it's a huge issue. We also know that 50% of the accidents last year in West Valley City were caused by illegal immigrants with no license.
Yeah, Trevor, when he was on, made that exact same point. He said he put forth the bill, and then it didn't pass.
Well, so Trevor didn't run that bill, but
Well, the bill itself
Yes, so
didn't pass.
I had the bill file open, and then Representative McPherson had the bill file open, and I gave the policy to Representative McPherson to run. He had some nexus with West Valley City, that's in his district, and they had a lot of really good data as they had been tracking it. And so we passed the bill out of the House, and it went to the Senate, and it died on the Senate floor on the last day of the session. And the concerning thing to me is there were comments made that were completely erroneous. comments about, well, my 15-year-old might be driving the tractor or the truck down the road for farming, and I don't want him to get impounded because blah, blah, blah. Well, we had exempted out those individuals in the bill. Any farm worker, any young person who was driving for farm work would not be subject to the penalty in the bill. But the Senate kept throwing out those types of comments, and they're just wrong. The other issue we heard, the other concern is, well, we just think impounding vehicles is particularly, what should I say? What's the word? Like punitive. And so the only other option, if we're going to enforce the law, well, we have two. We can actually create a law that just says nobody in the state of Utah needs to have a driver's license. That would be across the board more fair than saying that if you come here illegally, you don't have to have a driver's license, even though you can't read our signage for the most part, because West Valley City Police also told us they've done where they will have an officer stationed by school zones, where school crossings, and a large number of people that are speeding through school crossings are illegal immigrants, have never had a license, and when they're questioned, they don't speak any English and they have no idea what our signs mean. So they're speeding through zones where our children are walking across the street to go to school. No Utah resident should think that's okay. We need to enforce our law, right? So we either have to say nobody in Utah needs to have a license, that'd be fair, right? Or we have to say it's better to impound the vehicle than to incarcerate the individual.
Well, there's a lot goes into that too, because again, being connected to the Latin community, the vast majority of them have never driven a car until they got to the United States. So they're not only illegal, but they're out there driving. They probably learned how to drive from another illegal or another Latin friend of theirs, and they've probably been only driving for a few days, because the vast majority of them couldn't afford a car down in Mexico just because of the issues down there. Now, I do know a lot of them that have had cars down. They just leave their cars down there in Mexico, but there's a lot of them that a lot of times the first time they've ever driven a car is up here. And so and then down there, the traffic laws are virtually non-existent. Police down there don't do anything much for speeders or for running a stop sign or anything. So they're not even accustomed to even seeing traffic laws or understanding what those are. They don't understand what it means that if you do certain things, you're going to get pulled over and get a ticket. It doesn't dawn on them because they're just not used to it. They're not accustomed to that. They're coming from a completely different society, and they just don't understand the rules. And so now you're putting them out on the streets, and that's incredibly dangerous where it is law-abiding.
Yeah, and two of the other issues that we saw that were addressed in the bill that I think were particularly important is law enforcement came to us across multiple jurisdictions and said, the issue is when we pull individuals over who don't have a license, they refuse to identify themselves. And the only way we can force them to identify themselves or to take evidence that identifies them is to arrest them. And so we put in the bill that if the law enforcement officer pulled somebody over and that person failed to identify themselves to the satisfaction of the law enforcement officer, that the law enforcement officer could take a biometric, which means a fingerprint or a fingerprint panel or a buccal swab, whatever they needed to do to make sure that they were positively identifying this individual in the system. And the other thing we did is we got data from law enforcement agencies that showed that individuals that were here illegally and driving without a license were very often driving a communal car, not a car that they personally owned. And so we put in the bill a penalty for the individual who actually owned the car as well. And that was to ensure that we're sending the message, don't give your car to somebody who doesn't know how to drive on the roads and who isn't licensed to drive on the roads. We either have to believe that a license is really important to drive on the roads in the state of Utah to ensure some level of safety for the community, or not, right? But we can't have it both ways.
Another part of these suggestions that I have up here, one of them is the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement cannot deport someone who has been incarcerated for less than 1 year. And then she's put forth a bill to increase the maximum penalty from 364 to 365, because if your penalty is 364, then you're not incarcerated from a year. You get out,
And
then you don't have to get deported. But
Yeah.
why does that exist in the first place? Why does it take a year to deport somebody?
Great question. So that's an interplay with state and federal law. So what happened was that there's federal law that says that if somebody is incarcerated for a misdemeanor offense for less than a year, that they can't be deported on that offense. The state law used to say that for some misdemeanor offenses that you could be incarcerated for more than a year. But in 2000, I want to say 19, but I'm not 100% sure, Libertas Institute actually came out and proposed a bill that said that no misdemeanor could be sentenced to more than 364 days in order to avoid this
avoid
issue
that
in federal
specifically.
law. And it was, I will tell you, this was one of the hardest fights in the session. That bill died in committee and was resurrected through some serious CPR. And we were able to get it through. We did have to scale it back some, but that was one of the most important bills this session in order to collaborate with the Trump administration in their efforts to deport individuals who are committing serious crimes in the state of Utah.
So the individuals that commit like a misdemeanor and can't be deported, even though they're here illegally, they still can't be deported, is what that's saying, right?
No. So now they can, because
So now they can.
we did get that law passed for the most serious misdemeanor offenses.
But not all misdemeanor offenses.
Not all misdemeanor offenses,
If,
but
if they were not arrested specifically on a misdemeanor, or they were arrested specifically on a misdemeanor that time, but they've got other criminal history behind that,
they can be deported.
they can be deported. And again, I feel sorry for a lot of the Latin people, because I grew up in the construction world. They're incredibly hard workers. They worked way harder than half the North Americans that I was hiring. I prefer to actually hire the Latins because they just had better work ethic. And they'd work faster, harder, get the job done. Very, very good people. I talked to them all day long, and just honest workers. So there's hard to work with, trying to figure out, if we really do have 30 million illegals in the United States, how do we even deport even a portion of those? Because you do have a lot of hard workers, a lot of people that don't have a life back in their own country. You'd plop them back there, deport them, and then they're on the streets, and that wouldn't be fair either. So I get the argument for both sides, but good starting point, in my point of view, is if you got any type of criminal background, or if you've got any type of background where you've existed off of the public good, you're gone. I mean, if you're here illegally and you're living off of Medicaid and off of food stamps and off of WIC and all this other kind of stuff, so then you're just taking advantage of our system, then you need to be deported. But if you've been here illegally, but you've done an honest work, then something else is going to have to get figured out if you've been here for a certain period of time, because it's hard. I don't think it's possible to deport 30 million people, but again, I think it's more the majority of them we need to get out to where there's some kind of a fairness in there, but taking advantage of our public assistance programs, I don't think is good. And is there a way to, again, tag that in with proof of citizenship, just like we are with the voter rolls, to make sure that people are not on public assistance, or is that something that's going to have to be done at the federal level?
I don't know that there's a great nexus in the voter rolls, but there are ways, and some of our meetings this week with the Trump administration kind of helped direct some of the ways that we can collaborate in different databases in the state to identify individuals who shouldn't be receiving public benefits who are. So that was helpful. One of the interesting...
Like these 5 million people they just found out that they're all getting public assistance.
Yeah, correct. I think one of the things that's really interesting, so I think it was Texas that I was just looking on my phone to try to find it, but I think Texas ran a bill a little over a year ago to require hospitals to track how much they were spending on health care because, as you know, through EMTALA at the federal level, if somebody shows up at an emergency room, they have to be treated. And so even if it's for, a cold or, something that's not serious enough to warrant a visit to the emergency room, but because of EMTALA, you have to go to the emergency room to get that treatment if you do not have insurance or can't afford to go elsewhere, which is really inefficient, right? And
Well, it's incredibly expensive because that's why they go to the emergency room, because they know they're going to get treated
Exactly.
and they can't go anyplace else.
So what Texas did was they simply just said, we're going to track how much, we're going to tell hospitals, hey, let us know how much you are spending on treating illegal immigrants in our state. And they came back with the number recently, and it was $121 million in that 1 year. That's a lot of money for emergency room services, right? And a huge impact on those services.
Well, it just makes it so they have to charge more for the other services for those of us who are getting services because they got to recover it somehow.
Yeah.
It's not free.
Yes, and the other thing that I wanted to address per your comments was, if you look at that package of bills, we were very specific to target individuals who are here committing serious crimes that affect everyday Utahns. And we understand that people want to come here and want to have a better life and have no intention of breaking any, laws other than, hey, coming here is breaking the law. But we're sensitive to that. So we were very purposeful in targeting individuals who are committing serious crimes in our communities in that package of bills. Now, the entire package did not pass, but a significant portion of it did, and we will continue to work on that.
Yeah, and I know I probably get a lot of kickback for saying that, hey, some of these illegals should be allowed to stay, but in my philosophy, it's our fault. I mean, we allowed that to happen for the past 20, 30 years. So we got to take some responsibility for that. It was us, the voters, that elected officials that allowed that to happen.
Yes,
So,
in Congress.
In Congress. So you have to take responsibility for that. And so you just can't willy-nilly just kick people out. You got to take responsibility. But at the same time, what makes society more expensive for the rest of us is people specifically coming here and knowing that they can take advantage of our public assistance, and that's what they do. In fact, there's people here that I know that they get paid to teach illegals how to get on these programs. Again, I'm connected to that community. I'm not going to out anybody, but I know there's people that have become consultants in that world, and they'll literally go up to the illegals and any other Latin person they want, and they'll teach them, okay, this is how you get on Medicaid, this is how you get food stamps, this is how you get on WIC. And they'll teach them how to do it, and it works like a charm every single time. And I know I've had people in my own home that are not legal, and that have showed us how that works. And I'm like, that is crazy.
But there needs to be a path for people who are trying to go through the process the right way. There's a lady that I know very well at a local restaurant that I followed her path for 3 years, and her question is, when I came here, I'm not given a phone. I don't have the health benefits. I wasn't given a place to live. And she tries to work as much as she can, but she's running out of places she can work because she's got, I have a bad number, she says. For her illegal number, she's like, try to clean homes.
She bought the Social Security number from one of these black market people.
And she's like, how do I do the path the right way when all these other people are getting their benefits off?
And that's something the feds are going to have to fix, is the immigration policy, because I know a lot of people are trying to go through it legally too, and that is just an absolute mess. It is next to impossible to get in here legally.
Yeah, there's got to be a better path.
Even for someone like my own wife that came in as a refugee, not refugee, but on asylum status, legitimate asylum status, taken her years to get through the program. And the amount of money that has to be spent, there's thousands of dollars a year that she has to spend and just filing paperwork.
It's
that
a
needs
very
to be less
expensive process.
Very expensive. So no one's incentivized to go down that road. Nobody. And if we really want to fix the problem, we got to figure out how to incentivize people to go down that road. But That's a long conversation for someone in the federal side. Maybe I'll ask Mike Kennedy that when he comes in, because he's supposed to be coming in like a couple weeks as well, and
Great.
I'll drill him on it. But just having my 2 cents there. Let's change subjects and get out of the immigration and go on to something. Last week and the week before, I mentioned a certain representative up in the Washington State that said some not so cool things about the relationship with kids and parents. And I kind of did like a half a quote, and I went out and found it. Just wanted to get your opinion on it because I think this is quite interesting, to say the least.
Over 13 have the complete right to make their own decisions about their mental health care. Parents don't have a right to have notice. They don't have a right to have consent about that.
So, kids over 13, parents do not have the right to dictate their mental health or anything like that. They have their own decisions. Well, what's your opinion on that one?
I wish that idea was foreign to people in Utah as well. Unfortunately, it isn't. I've run several bills or helped with bills that have required parents to receive informed consent and to have the opportunity to either opt in or opt out of programs for their children that were being provided without that important information being provided to them. We passed a bill this year. It was one of the most controversial bills of the session for some reason that said that mental health professionals in the schools couldn't treat children without first getting consent from the parents. It seems like a no-brainer to me. But, there was a lot of pushback on that.
How would that even struggle to get through that? Even in this state. I mean, everything should have to have parental consent. I mean, absolutely everything should have parental consent.
Yeah.
The school districts, the medical, nobody should be able to do anything without first notifying a parent, saying this is what we're thinking about, yes or no.
Yeah. So Representative Gracious ran that bill. She did a great job. She did get it through. It's good policy, and it is enacted now. A couple of other thoughts.
What were the counter arguments to that? Why wouldn't they?
We were going to increase the suicide rate for young people because they wouldn't be able to obtain mental health services in a timely manner. But we had already exempted out emergencies like threatened or imminent suicide or, some other medical emergency. So again, it's a lot of disingenuousness, but I do think there is this underlying belief. So for instance, a doctor approached me. I was in committee, and a doctor approached me and said, hey, I would like to talk with you about having these professionals in our schools. He said, through federal case law, in loco parentis. Okay, so he talked about some of the case law that addresses in loco parentis. So basically claiming that the school district or the school is the parent in place of the parents in cases where medical treatment might be necessary, and argued that nurses know better than parents many times what children need to be treated with, and literally staring me in the face in the Utah Senate committee room.
Yeah,
And
that's a big no-no in my book.
Oh, yes. And I sometimes forget to be generous in my responses and soft. And this was one of those times when I shut that poor old man down pretty darn fast. But
I would agree with that comment.
but I feel strongly that there is nothing that should or could replace a parent in the life of a child, and that those parental decisions are so important, and that when government feels empowered to move in and encroach even on those decision-making potentialities, that it actually sidelines parents in a way, and especially parents that maybe don't feel empowered anyway, or that are uncomfortable or sensitive about their parenting abilities. We would tend to then undermine their legitimate efforts to try to be good parents. Instead, we should be supporting them in making those decisions for their children, not taking the decisions away.
Well, there's an underlying evil behind this. We discussed this a little bit last week, where their whole goal is this slippery slope. They want to put this thing together one step at a time. And it's where they're trying to engineer a slide in their direction. So they're going to say, okay, well, kids don't have, or parents don't have the right to tell their kids what kind of mental health they need. Well, the next thing you know, well, the school districts have more authority than the parents while the child is in with the school districts, right? That's not their end goal. That's just the one or two steps that they want to take. In the end, the evil that they want to put together is they want those kids indoctrinated into their direction, and particularly in conservative states. So if you have conservative parents and parents that don't like LGBTQ stuff or pornography in books or anything else like that, and their opinion is that's not correct, it's too conservative, we need to re-educate these kids. They're going to figure out, well, how do we re-educate the kids? How do we change the next generation? How do we remove those morals and values and put in our morals and values? That's their goal in the end. They're going to use these smaller stepping stones, but in the end, they want to change a generation. And so the only way they can change a generation is by slowly pulling the kids from underneath the parents and putting in their ideas. And this whole mental health thing comes down to sexual dysphoria. Because if you're thinking about transitioning or something like that, they want to have that type of mindset allowed and not have parents be able to say, well, it's sexual dysphoria. It's not that they think they're gay or lesbian. Let's go get them some help that helps them not be that, or whatever the parents want to do. They want that to go their direction, to allow that stuff to be normal in society. And so they're going to take this step by step, and I'm afraid that we on our side, we don't recognize the small steps for what they are. There's an end goal, and all we're seeing is, well, they're not going to have the emergency medication they need. They're not going to have the emergency mental health that they need. They're going to be suicidal, and they're using those as these smaller excuses to get bigger goals, because they'll let that law pass, and then they'll let it sit there and become normal for 1 or 2 years. And as soon as it's normalized and no one's discussing it, it's just normal, no one thinks it's anything different, then they're going to try the next step. Well, what's the next thing we can push? And there's going to be a big old uproar about, oh, that's too far left. That's not moral. There's no values in that. And then they'll figure out how to get it slide in, and they'll just let it sit there for a couple of years. And it will normalize again. All the parents will think nothing of it. Nothing's happening.
The path to pedophilia.
And then they'll try the next step. So I'm pretty positive that that's the direction things are going. Is like she was just saying, that the path of pedophilia, trying to make it so they're minor attractive people instead of pedophiles. That's the stepping stones that they're trying to use to get more and more normal what isn't normal. Because we wouldn't be having these discussions 20 years ago. And that's just the way it's been. So that's what I'm seeing is this. They're very, very patient on their side. And then on our side, we have very, very short memories.
Yes. So I have been a proponent for many years, and Ingrid and I were actually talking about this on the way over, of radical incrementalism. The left is really good at this. They're really good at taking small wins and moving the needle. And the right is really bad at long-term planning and having a long-term vision and making incremental steps toward that vision.
Well,
and
just not to interrupt you there, the right has a lot of history in just killing bills. If his bill's not perfect, we discussed this with Trevor Lee. If it's not everything they want, let's just kill it, right? They don't like the increments and taking those small steps.
Right.
Take the win, go for the home run later.
Correct.
Take the base hit, take the 2 base hit, and then go for the home run later. The other side, they like those small increments. Why? Because they know they're going to be very, very controversial, and then they know it's going to take a couple of years before that controversy just kind of dissipate and no one's going to be talking about it anymore. Whereas on our side, there's a lot of representatives that want that home run, and if it's not there, they're not voting for it.
And then to your point on some of the extremes, right? I think we see some of the movement within systems, governmental systems, to be made based on an argument of efficiency. So I'll give you an example. There was a school district in the state of Utah that was including in that very large packet of papers that parents used to have to sign. Now it's usually all online, right? But it was basically a medical power of attorney type idea. It was basically giving consent for treatment of their child for medical issues throughout the school year. And it wasn't until some treatments happened that the parent wasn't okay with and found out about that we found out that that was happening and were able to pass legislation to stop it. But that the argument was, well, this is just way more efficient, right, than asking all these parents when their kid needs some treatment at school. So sometimes I think it's not as nefarious as we might make it out to be. But then at other times, when we look at the big picture, so, I was very purposeful in teaching my children how to analyze information. I felt like that was super important, right? And I think so often what I see from some of the educational systems that we spend a lot of money on is not that purposeful, like, let's teach you how to analyze, but more of a responsive, like bell to bell, move from class to class. Don't spend too much time digging into a subject. Let's interrupt you at the 45-minute mark because, hey, we've got to move you on to the next subject because we have. So basically interrupting what would be a normal and natural learning process for a young person to really start to understand issues and evaluate them for themselves. And I do know that there are some educators who really try hard to do that for our young people and to instill in them the idea that they can evaluate what they're seeing in the media or on social media, and that they can then learn to detect the propaganda that is so often out there that you were speaking of. But I think all too often our young people are graduating from high school without having that ability to really evaluate for themselves what they're seeing and hearing. And we see so much emotional response to what we see in the media or on social media in our public square. And I've seen it just as I've served in elected office, just the emotional reaction that I had never seen before. But in the last few years, it's just become really shocking to see the types of behavior that individuals are willing to display in the public square that would never have been thought to be effective or even a good idea in the past. And so I think it's really important for us to, and I guess I can go back to that radical incrementalism idea. Part of what we talked about in this education roundtable that I attended recently was how do we get focus on students, not systems, right? And not pushing students through grade by grade by grade, but not really making sure that they're getting the education that they need. So those are some really important and
I think there's a heavy push on the left to indoctrinate kids. And so, yeah, the math skills, the science skills, we talked about this with Rod Hall as well, that there's a lot of problems in the education system where there's a lot more push for, like I said, indoctrination and things that have nothing to do with education. And there's about focusing on math. There's a certain agenda that people think is more important. And that's what I was just saying is I think people are just trying to change the next generation. Why? Because if the parents have certain morals and we can't skew the parents, if we can't skew their voter bloc, then we'll just change the next generation. The only way they can change the next generation is by pulling the next generation out from underneath the parents, which means that they need to have lax laws within the education system so they can slide in that indoctrination, slide in that supposed higher authority, so they can indoctrinate and change the next generation. And we see that actually happening in a lot of your bluer states, because you see what happens in the universities, where they are heavily liberal coming out of it. You'll have a lot of really good conservative kids going in, and then all of a sudden they've 180, just way liberal coming out. And it's more indoctrination than anything else. Going back to this gentleman here, which is our lovely congressman in the state of Washington. I mean, I did some research on him to find out, well, what made him think that he could say something like that, and that's actually a good idea, that kids over 13 shouldn't have...
Tell me he doesn't have children.
That's what I'm going to tell you. So shouldn't have any say from the parents as to their mental health. So come to find out, he is gay. He is married to another gentleman. And they have 4 boys themselves. They had it through a surrogate down in San Diego. And surrogacy was not legal in his state, and so he had to go to California where it was legal. And then he got a bill passed in Washington, because the problem he was having was when a child is born to a mother, even if it was a surrogacy, that the child still belonged to the mother until she formally gave the child up for adoption to whoever was the paying surrogate people, right? And he didn't like that. He said, well, if we have a contract, they're going to be a surrogate, then we need to be on the birth certificate as the birth parents, even though we're not the birth parents. And he got that to pass. So now whoever's on the contract is now the legal mother or father in his case, and not the actual birth mother up in Washington, which is pretty scary that they can't retract. And the funny thing about it was completely donor. The egg was a donor, the sperm was a donor. Nothing is from him or his husband, nothing. So they have no DNA, nothing, no ties at all. All they did is sign a contract with a surrogate, went and found a sperm donor and had 4 kids. And then all of a sudden, with his new law that he just passed, that they're the legal parents if there was a surrogate contract. And then just recently, he just passed another law up there in Washington that made it so schools do not have to share mental health with the parents at all, ever. That is now a law up there that schools don't have to share that mental health. So going on top of this discussion he just did, he actually enforced that by passing a law that schools no longer have to share any of the mental health of the children. It's against the law now up there. So those slippery slopes had to have started somewhere. And so my fear is when people look at something like what you were just saying, is where they just slipped in a little piece of paper saying, hey, when parents are not around, we've got a little authority to kind of treat them. If we need to give them an aspirin or something like that, we can give them an aspirin. We need to give them a Band-Aid or a bandage. And they call that the medical assistance, right? We don't need to have parental permission for that. But that's a slippery slope, right? It may seem innocent, and we're all out here, oh, that's innocent. Yeah, I don't see what the argument is before that.
Pretty sure I signed something like that.
And they'll come up with an argument that makes that look completely innocent and then make you look stupid for going against it, right? But then again, that's what I'm saying is they'll let that go through, let that normalize, wait a couple of years, and then they'll try the next step. Well, now that we can do some medical assistance, let's go up to mental, then let's go up to parents don't have any say, but we're just going to start treating them, and they're just going to take that a step at a time. And a lot of conservatives are just very naive because we just kind of get used to it and then we forget about it. And it's out of sight, out of mind.
Well, that is what the left has been doing in this country for many, many years. And again, we need to get better at doing that on the right and pushing back against it. The bill number is HB 281, I believe, Representative Gracious' bill. So if you want to look that up, it goes in the opposite direction of Washington State.
I'm so glad to hear that. So glad to hear that. And it's one reason I'll never move to a blue state. All right. Well, let's change topics again.
Okay.
So one of the biggest things that the Trump administration is fighting is rogue judges. I mean, on immigration, on just the budget. He can't even pull back money on spending of any kind. There's just rogue judges everywhere. I mean, just hit the news that of these two judges that got arrested by the feds for harboring fugitives or illegal aliens who were also fugitives. One let them escape right out the back door of her own judge office in the courthouse. The other one took them home. Took them home into their house. I'm like, that is scary. Just take some random.
At least they practice what they preach. They must really believe what they say.
So here in Utah, judges ruled against the Utah Fits All Voucher program, and I think this is part of that rogue judges thing. It's where judges are starting to legislate from the bench, and then they go into this and start saying, well, the legislators or you're trying to put forth a bill to where they have, or you guys put together a committee to kind of tell us, the voters, on which judges should stay, which ones should go, because we have no information on them at all.
Oh, HB 512.
Yeah, HB 512.
Okay.
That's part of this. So there's two articles that I want to kind of cover with you. This one about HB 512, and then obviously this one where the judge is ruling against the Utah Fits All Voucher program, because I think they kind of fit together. And you have to tell me if I'm wrong, but maybe the 512 was spurred by judges like this that voted against the Utah Fits All Voucher program, because that's what the parents wanted. But you have a lot of rogue judges that think they can legislate from the bench. But one of the things that the Standard Examiner says in here is what everybody's afraid of is now judges are now going to feel like they have to respond to a committee and not be legitimate judges that are supposed to be completely nonpartisan, completely separate. And my opinion is if they were really trying to be nonpartisan, really separate, they wouldn't try legislating from the bench. They just, this is the law, this is what I'm going to follow. And now it's where they're skewing a lot of the things to where it's not even law, it's almost his personal opinion of where they should rule. And I can understand the fear, because in the opposite way, if this was a Democrat majority state and they were putting out something similar, saying, hey, this is, as a legislative body, this is how we're ranking these particular judges, they'd rank it just the opposite of us and try to get the conservative judges out, right? And we obviously are going to rank them and try to get the liberal judges out. And that's just the way it's going to work. And there's got to be a way to make sure that whatever the law is, that the judges are abiding by the law and not legislating by the bench. Because if you have a bunch of rogue judges, then obviously we want to kind of swing the opposite direction and put forth things that will control that. But if the shoes are in the opposite feet, they could also really, really bite us in the butt too.
Agreed. Here's what's interesting. HB 512 was more about getting pertinent information in front of the voters for the voters to make decisions. So even when I was on the city council, the most common question I was asked around election time was, what should I vote for the judges?
I get those questions all the time.
Right?
All the time.
And why? I mean, JPEG would argue, well, we have JPEG, and that's so helpful, right? But it's not helpful,
No.
right? That information is not really pertinent to what the voters want to see when they're making decisions on retention elections for judges. And so that bill, the purpose of it was to say, we need more information as voters. And I think it's ironic because, and I'll just point this out, the Utah Supreme Court stated that voters need proper information with sufficient, quote, clarity to enable them to express their will, end quote. So when the courts say that, but then say, but we don't want them to have any information, that some committee of the legislature finds because we're not beholden to the legislature. Well, that's an interesting argument. And in conversations with the Chief Justice, we got into the history of the founders. And it's interesting because so many people, even in that article, I think it's asserted that, hey, the courts are a co-equal branch with the legislature and the executive, right? But that's not what the founders set up, and that certainly isn't true in our Utah Constitution either. Basically, Madison is arguing in there that the branches are not equal and that the legislature is generally the most powerful, but that the powers of the legislature are then divided amongst a House and a Senate so that there are checks and balances internally within that very strong and powerful branch of government. And in our Constitution in the state of Utah, we create the courts, we oversee and pass policy on judicial retention elections, like all of these things. I have a list, probably 15 long, of things in the Constitution that are directly given as powers to the legislature regarding the courts. So in my conversations with Chief Justice, he even said, yes, it's the judiciary is the weakest branch, and it is. These are not co-equal branches, but that doesn't mean that the legislatures should then abuse power and try to take over the judiciary. Not by any means. I will give an example. So when we're talking even about efficiency in the courts, there's this weird new rule that the Supreme Court has created for themselves where they're just taking a few cases a year. Well, we spend a lot of money as taxpayers on the Supreme Court and on the appeals court and on the 3rd District and every other district court, as well as local judges that decide on infractions and misdemeanor cases at the local level, right? We spend a lot of money on this. We do not spend that amount of money with the expectation that the Supreme Court will pick and choose and overburden the appeals court and then come to the legislature and ask for more money for more appeals court judges so that they can continue to not produce decisions. I don't think it's unheard of, and it's certainly, the data bears this out in other states, for them to really be productive and maybe do a case a month. That just doesn't seem like too much for a Supreme Court justice to do. But in those
That seems quite low, to be honest, one case a month. What are we paying you to do? To sit there and do nothing for the rest of the month?
Well, right now that number is very much lower than that. And so these are the discussions that we've had because again, representing the taxpayers, we want to make sure that we are getting an efficient court is deciding. And for instance, you know that I sponsored with Senator McKay the trigger law that when Roe v. Wade was overturned said that in Utah now life begins at implantation, and outside of these exceptions, abortion is not allowed. And that went into effect for maybe, I think it was less than 48 hours before it was stayed by an activist judge. And that activist judge, it's a really interesting kind of domino effect that happened. The case was originally assigned to a judge that it was like a game of hot potato. He gave it to Judge Stone because Judge Stone was nearing retirement, and so
no one wanted to be behind it. No one wanted their name behind it.
So the hot potato went to Judge Stone. Judge Stone stayed it on really fallacious arguments, and then we have been sitting on that, and the Supreme Court has been sitting on our appeal now for about 3 years. I think that for something so important that 8,000 lives have ended between the time that Roe v. Wade was overturned in Utah and the time, and today, that 8,000 lives were ended, that the Supreme Court should be able to at least issue a decision on our appeal to Judge Stone's decision.
Well, that's the one law that's actually really, really upset me when that judge decided on that, because a judge shouldn't unilaterally be able to decide to be able to shut that law down. You weren't elected like the rest of the legislature was. There's a lot more people in the legislature that are a little bit closer to their constituents than this judge is. And to be able to put an indefinite stay on it, I mean, we have to figure out a way to limit the stays. I mean, President Trump is having that same problem. You you can stop anything, and the left knows you can stop anything by just finding a judge, and then they judge shop it because they know which judges are going to vote in their direction, which are not. And then you got these judges that are staying or legislating from the bench. They're not forcing the Constitution. They're not forcing the current laws, because the way the Constitution works is the legislature makes the laws, judicial branch just interprets them. That's it. You're not legislating from the bench, and then the executive branch is supposed to enforce them. And now you got a judicial body that's legislating and enforcing, and most of it's just based off of personal opinion. You can see that here on abortion. You can see it on school choice here. You can see it everywhere in the Trump administration, where these judges kind of get out of hand. And then on the other side, we want to come and kind of rein that in, which is what we need to do, is kind of rein in their authority, their power, and kind of limit their staying ability. But then you have all these other arguments coming into where the legislature is going to kind of blur the lines between the three step of branches. And there's a lot of legitimate arguments there, but at the same time, like you were saying, the judicial is the weakest arm, because all they're supposed to do is interpret the law. They're not making it or anything else like that. And when they start making laws through the bench, we have to be able to draw the line there. But we also have to enforce that through the courts, a very system that's
Exactly.
we're having a problem with.
And if you read the Utah Fits All decision, I don't know if you've had time to read that decision. It's been about a week. I read it within about a half hour of it being released, and I have serious concerns with that judge's interpretation of our Constitution, stating that this program is unconstitutional. First of all, many keep calling it a voucher program. There's a very significant difference between a voucher and a scholarship. The money is not going to a school, right, for religious purposes, for instance, Juan Diego or a Catholic private school, right? The money is going to parents. And then the parents are determining where they spend that money to educate their child. So that's a distinction that's very important when it comes to our law. And the reason that it isn't unconstitutional, the other thing that the judge said in her decision, which was quite shocking, is that the legislature doesn't actually have plenary power on education legislation, which it goes without saying that we do. Her decision brings into question so many different programs that do not, we spend so much on education. We spend $10 billion in the state of Utah on educating our children. And that includes local property tax levies, that includes the state property tax levy, that includes everything, right? All the money that we spend in the state of Utah on education. We spend that money for around 687,000 students. Do the math. That's a lot of money per student that we spend. And we have programs that give money only to a very small and select group of students within the system, not the system, not a system-wide funding or a per-student funding. So should we then, under this decision, get rid of the Carson Smith Scholarship Program that benefits young children who have an IEP or a 504, who have autism or are developmentally delayed, who have been tremendously helped? The stories coming out of this program are so inspiring for these young kids to get the education that they need through the scholarship program. But her decision, in my opinion, would encompass that program as well, and many other programs like that. So it's a nonsensical decision that we are planning to appeal. We have to wait for her to issue decisions on the rest of the case. And we are assured that that will happen before the middle of May. And then we will be able to move with an appeal.
I just always thought it interesting how the legislative body comes together, and you've got a lot of legislators coming together on a choice, and then just a single judge can just overrule everyone in the legislature. I mean, I don't know how our Constitution allows for that much authority. Because again, you're supposed to interpret the law, not make it. You're not there to go and decide whether the legislature is making a correct law or not. It's their job to make the correct law or not. That's why they argue amongst each other. That's why you have legislation, the process. That's why you have a Congress or the House and the Senate, because the issues with the bills usually get weeded out in the legislature between the two bodies, and that's why you have the two separate bodies. It's not up to a single judge to decide whether these 400 people did their job or not. So it's 400 to 1 or whatever the between the House and the Senate combined. And I have a big problem with that because
it's 104.
Or 104.
Sorry.
Or with even with the feds. I mean, you got 535 or 435 in the House and another 100 in the Senate. So you got 535 people there, and you got one judge that can rule against that. Obviously, a lot of those are definitely not getting passed by the full House or the full Senate, but you have that many people placing the argument, and if it passes, your job as a judge is just to interpret and help enforce it. Your job is not to rehash everything that just went through the legislative process and just decide, well, I don't agree with any of them, so we're not going to enforce that one.
Well, and remember, each legislator represents a constituency, and the legislature as a whole represents the entire state. And Utah Fits All, the original bill that created Utah Fits All, passed with a 2/3 majority in both House and Senate. That is a veto-proof, referendum-proof majority. And a judge just vetoed the law and will of the people.
Yeah, I don't know how we change that, because that definitely needs to get changed. And the same thing, like sort of the Trump administration, because they're not even getting like big district court judges. They're just finding some random judge out there that's putting a kibosh on the entire country. So there's some judge in Pennsylvania or New York or in Washington.
We have seen
that can put a kibosh on a law that's nationwide. So I didn't see that guy in any national-wide election process for him to decide what the national law is going to be. But I get back to my point is, you have a legislature specifically supposed to hash out the laws, and then they make a decision. If they feel like that's the law, it needs to be the law of the state or the land, that's the law. Your job as a judge is now just to interpret that law that was passed, not shut it down. But yet it's getting shut down like crazy. And this particular judge, I think, just sides with the union. And I think the union's got a lot of issues. Let's listen to what these guys have to say here real quick.
A judge has just struck down the Utah Fits All scholarship program. The Utah Education Association sued, arguing the program siphoned money from public education in violation of the state constitution. In a ruling, the judge sided with the state's largest teachers union. She also rejected the state's request to dismiss the lawsuit. We spoke with the president of Utah Parents United tonight about the decision.
It's a huge disappointment for Utah families to see this district court judge side with the UEA and side with special interests and rule against families and their ability to direct their children's education.
She says they are planning on filing an appeal on the ruling. In a statement to Fox 13, the Utah Education Association says, in part, quote, "This is a significant victory for public education and a reaffirmation that public money belongs in public school."
So I have a big beef with that statement.
Do tell.
I have a big beef with that statement. Public money belongs to public schools. Like the money that we pay into it all of a sudden is not ours anymore. It does not belong to the people anymore. It's just, it goes in this box. Now, you as the people don't have any say of where that money goes anymore. It's now public funds. Us, the elites, us, the bosses, get to dictate where that money goes. That's not how this country works. I mean, it's we, the people. We dictate exactly where that money is. It's not public money to where you can just spend it however you want to spend it. We, the people, decide through our elected officials how that money goes and where it goes, particularly when it has to do with our kids. And I'm of the opinion that the money should follow the child. If I don't like what that school's teaching and that school's too liberal for me and I want to move my kid to some other school, those funds need to follow my son or follow my daughter. And that's just the way it should be. Those are funds that are should be assigned to the child, and no union should be deciding how my child is taught or how those funds are spent. But again, unions seem to have a lot of authority, and I don't know how we got such a liberal union in the state of Utah, but being such a conservative state, it seems like we have one of the most liberal unions out there.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting conversation. So at this education roundtable that I attended, there were several public school teachers that attended and gave some valuable perspective. And one of the things that we discussed was that public school is generally considered very good at delivering a quality education to the mean. But when you get outside of that mean, one or two standard deviations outside of the mean, it is no longer an optimal education where a student can really thrive in that situation. And so this teacher was like, I love the scholarship program because I can suggest to parents that there might be other options that would work better for their child, because I can see that their child is not a good fit within the system. And like you said, we should be funding children, not systems, right? And there are many dear friends that I have that are public school teachers that they are in there trying to, with their whole heart and soul, trying to educate children and give them the very best possible education, and to feel that they're being undermined because they can't have those valuable conversations with parents where maybe they can redirect. It's a problem, and I feel confident that our appeal will be successful. I could be wrong. I hope I'm not.
It's like I said, I think the money should follow the student. I think the only way where that becomes dangerous is in sports, because particularly in high schools, then you'll have coaches out there recruiting, and we don't want recruiting happening until college. And I could definitely see that happening if parents can just take
recruiting's already happening. I can get you some parents to tell you recruiting's happening.
Well, because we do allow variances. So yes. I mean, yes, that does happen, and it happens from public to private and from private to public. And so.
But this is where I'm taking note of that judge's name, and be sure I will come election time, when it's time for that judge to be up, reminding people of how that judge rules.
But the general public has no idea how to vote in or vote out judges. They have no idea. I mean, I get it. My parents call me.
I get the call the night before.
Friends that call me, I'm like, oh.
And then I call Karianne, and then
we have successfully in the state of Utah voted not to retain one judge, I believe, in the last, I want to say 15 years, but it could be a little longer. So it is rare, but it does happen.
It's a little bit longer than I looked it up. I think it was like 2003 or 2006.
But that's because we never say anything. If I start right now, and I already have, telling people, note this name and what has happened and look at it. And we need to keep that in the public eye. And then with your bill, hopefully, will they, when that comes up and you suggest one that this committee has decided should not be retained, will there be any documentation behind it as to how they came to that decision?
So HB 512, actually, I on purpose held as part of a negotiation in order to get SB 296 across the finish line. So that bill, the courts or the judiciary and the bar went neutral on after I agreed to hold HB 512. And those two policies were so important that we wanted to move those. Well, it was 296, and then there were two other bills that they were already neutral on. So we were able to get a pretty strong package passed that will address some of the issues in the next, in the near future. But we have a working group throughout the interim where we will be discussing HB 512 policy and how we can find a way forward. And I have some unique and interesting ideas for how to get information before voters.
How will you guys assemble that information? Because I think what the general public's going to be worried about is the bias in it, right? So how is the information you guys put together going to be decided? Because right now it specifically says there's going to be no parameters behind it.
Well, there were parameters in the bill, and I did have a sub that I was going to adopt, and that I had already consulted with the House on, so I knew that we would be able to get the bill across the finish line. But the working group will just basically examine how to get better information before the voters. So it's not, HB 512 is not the starting place. The starting place is, how do we get more pertinent information before voters at election time in regards to judicial retention elections? So that's the starting line, and we'll go from there.
And that you guys want to put that actually on the ballot so people can actually read that.
Not necessarily. In fact, the sub that I had pulled it back from the ballot and said we're putting it in the voter information pamphlet, and that would be equally, I think, that would be an equally beneficial way for voters to see, here's kind of an opinion based on these metrics for voters to consider when they're considering.
Well, I think that's what everybody wants to know is what are those metrics going to be? Who's going to decide what voters see in that pamphlet?
So the working group that we're assembling to work on this through the interim will include the courts. So it will include the legislature. It will include somebody from the executive branch. It will include somebody from the bar. So basically, and then somebody from local, so that we get kind of the local opinion on judges. So we're trying to bring a broad range of people to the table.
It'll be pretty fair then.
Yes.
And so they really can't dispute that. Because I love the bill, and I love the idea. That my fear is another judge is going to shut it down, right?
Yeah.
This isn't fair. You guys are encroaching upon our space. This is unconstitutional. Is going to be the common argument we're going to see out there. It's going to come fly around like everything is against Doge right now. So we got to be able to put something together that is not shut downable.
Correct.
Essentially. So if you got someone from the bar, someone from the court, someone from the executive
Local
branch,
governments,
local government, then that should be pretty all-inclusive. So,
Yeah.
And then the parameters of, have you guys any idea of what kind of parameters you're going to put on there to decide what information is going to be put out there?
Well, I kind of want to do a fresh, clean slate start with the discussions with the working group, so that there's no preconceived, here's what the parameters are, because I think that will invite a broader range of ideas that will be able to collate into something moving forward. So I don't have anything in mind per se.
Do you think it's going to be something along the lines of, here are the cases that judge saw, here are the rulings? Is it going to lay out rulings, or how judges ruled in certain cases, or what do you think is going to be on there?
Not necessarily. I do think we get kind of into that gray area when we start to talk about specific rulings. But I think we can definitely talk about, and JPEG does to some extent, they send out surveys to defense and prosecution during cases, and they get feedback from both defense and prosecution on judicial decisions. But what I've heard from both defense and prosecution is they feel that the survey process itself is not working well to really get kind of a feel. And so maybe adding some public input into, well, actually, this was the perception from, for instance, I hear constantly from constituents and non-constituents about one judge in the state of Utah on decisions. And when I go back and listen to the hearings, I am shocked by the way that this judge handles themselves in a court of law in the state of Utah, and the kinds of rhetoric that are spoken across the bench. And so something like that, I think voters would find really pertinent to making a decision, right? But unless you're involved in the system, either through maybe a family law case or a criminal case, you probably aren't even aware.
And even then, you're involved with one judge and not all of them.
Right.
So you may have opinion on one judge, but there's not enough people to have opinions on all the judges to matter in an election.
Yeah.
Frankly, that's what it is. And so you have to get all that information out to all the voters. So, because there's only the power of numbers. If only a few people know, then they're not going to vote out or vote in anybody.
Yes.
And it's just the way it's going to work.
Yeah.
But we definitely got to get rid of the activism.
Yes.
Last couple of things here, and I find this one very, very interesting. Allowing 18 to 20-year-olds to have open carry. I have nothing against that. I think that's a good thing. I can see where there's going to be a lot of kickback on this one, just because people are afraid of young people that don't know much about them to have them. I had a experience yesterday with one of my daughter's friends shot himself in the hand when
Really?
he was unloading his gun the other day, and just inexperience. And I think that's a lot of the fear of people when they're talking about that younger generation. And I don't want the Second Amendment quashed or even remotely pulled back at all, or even have any type of guidelines on or anything like that. But I do get the kind of a sense that people need to have some kind of firearm safety or proficiency of some kind. And I get that argument. What has been the kickback on this?
I really appreciate the question, and I'm glad for the opportunity to address. So that headline does not represent the actual policy that is in the gun recod bill.
Oh, good.
So 18-year-olds can actually already carry openly in the state of Utah.
A pistol, because they can't even buy one until they're 21.
So they can possess under federal law, and they can openly carry in Utah under current law. And so the distinction that was made in the bill was whether they could carry openly loaded or with just a round in the chamber. With just a round in the magazine, which is a difference of 1.2 seconds for most shooters, right? So a distinction without a difference. So what this bill was a gun recodification, and it went through the Criminal Justice Recodification Subcommittee for a hearing, and an activist media person kind of caught hold of it and misread it and then put an article out. And so it just kind of spurned this like crazy misinformation campaign on the bill. And what ended up happening is HB 133 didn't make it past a Senate committee. It passed the House, but it failed in Senate committee. But we were able to sub the language into another bill in the Senate, and then it ended up passing completely. And what it did was, it's really important for people in the state of Utah to understand what their rights are. In order to exercise your right to defend yourself or your family or others, you need to know what that right is and isn't. And so our code was a mess. A literal mess. Over years, it had just become a hodgepodge of conflicting and confusing statutes, so that even our attorneys were like, we don't know what Second Amendment rights are in Utah, because this is a mess. And so this was a recodification, which means we were cleaning up the language so that people could know what their rights are in the state of Utah, which is really important to me.
Yeah.
As you know, I run a lot of Second Amendment friendly legislation because I believe in that fundamental right to self-defense that the founders also believed in. And so, and this is just common sense legislation, right? So the headlines and the misinformation in the media were such that I got a lot of questions in town halls and other things like, what are you doing? Why are you trying to arm 18-year-olds? Well, they can already openly carry. We've had the law also where they could openly carry in their car, as you know. And anyway, so
That's so strange that the media would run, insightful
that.
things like that. That's
It's not, the media would never do that, right?
well, and the law, I think that you, or the article that you put up was, I think, was it the KSL?
It was
Yeah, it's a
KSL.
KSL.
Yeah, that one wasn't as bad as some of the others.
Well, I've read the other ones. This is why I pulled this one up, because this one
Yeah.
actually was a little more along the lines of what I thought reality was.
Yeah, that one was a better representation than some of the other articles. And I appreciate the
I mean, you got the
reporter.
exact same quote you just gave us right now is the exact same quote they have on here is that Utahns should know their rights.
Yeah.
This bill clarifies their rights and allows every Utahn to be able to read the code and understand what they can and cannot do, which is the whole point of it, right?
Yeah. We did actually in the bill also strengthen, so you know that NFA devices that young people, they can't actually possess or utilize NFA devices legally under federal law, but the state of Utah only listed 2 NFA devices, not the whole gamut. And so we clarified and included all NFA devices in the state law because it's federal law as well. And obviously NFA, the Stamp Act, that's all federal law. So felt like it was appropriate to align with that.
So you had a recent trip to D.C. Want to go over your conversations with Robert F. Kennedy and what's going on with a little more food safety? I think the biggest part of that is I learned that they are now passing a law to take oil-based stuff out of our food, which I don't know how got into our food in the first place. But you'd like to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know if you've seen, but there's some information floating around the internet that talks about the different ingredients that are found in Fruit Loops, for instance, in Canada versus the United States.
Yeah, it's all in the food colorings.
Right, and the petroleum-based dyes that are utilized. And this goes back to some hey, back in the day, people thought that the brighter the color, the more a person would want to eat it. And so they added these artificial dyes. And now RFK and other scientists are looking into it, and they believe that there's some correlation with some adverse health effects from these preservatives and petroleum-based
Oh,
products.
sure there is. How did those meetings go? How did it go meeting RFK? I mean,
Well, RFK actually came out to Utah a few weeks ago, and we met with him at that point. And that was mostly to discuss the legislation we passed in Utah that got these petroleum-based artificial dyes and colors or flavors
well,
and
he
colors.
came here for the fluoride.
So that was one of the bills. So we
Yeah.
passed 3 bills
Oh, you
that
passed
he
3.
came to celebrate. One was we said no artificial dyes or colors in school lunches or preservatives on this list. Granite School District had already been doing this for 3 years, so we knew that it was not going to be a tremendous cost impact to schools. We can still provide healthy, good lunches that don't have these potentially harmful ingredients in them to our school children. So we passed that bill. We passed a bill that said those who are receiving SNAP benefits in the state of Utah cannot use those benefits to purchase soft drinks, which are 0 or empty calorie, not 0, but empty calorie drinks that provide no nutritional value and can be argued are actually quite harmful to health when the SNAP benefits are meant to provide actually nutritious food to keep somebody alive and to help them thrive and be healthy through a time when maybe they cannot provide for themselves. So we did those 2 bills, and then the fluoride prohibition, which that was interesting because we had so much broad support from cities and counties. As you know, the type of fluoride, the hydrofluorosilicic acid that was added to our water supply was very caustic to pipes, to expensive water delivery systems. And so our water...
And the delivery people hated them because what I hear is they have to dress up in hazmat suits in order to deliver it.
And we've had some of our employees that have been on permanent disability in the state of Utah because of accidents with that extremely toxic substance, right, that they're putting in the water. And one of our senators recently joked that next year we're going to pass a bill to put Prozac in the water supply, which is funny, but it gives perspective, right, that
You guys should put that bill out just to troll the media and see what happens.
I just think it's an interesting...
And then you have to come out to the pulpit where you meet him with a serious face and actually...
Well, I won't say the other drug he suggested, but it Anyway, it begins with a V. So anyway, the water supply is not the delivery mechanism for fluoride for a number of reasons, right? And there,
Again, going back to parents, it takes a decision away from the parents again.
right.
If the parents want the fluoride, then
That's right.
go get the fluoride.
And we added to the bill that for any parent who wants to go get fluoride at the pharmacy for their child, they can do so without a prescription to save them a visit to the doctor to get a prescription. So that was an important thing as well, to make sure that for parents who want to give their children sodium fluoride, which is the type of fluoride that dentists usually administer, that they could go to the pharmacy and do so.
Well, how was it meeting JFK? Do you have conversation with him? How long that last?
You know, he's clearly a very intelligent man, and he's done a ton of research. And he can name studies just like that. It's really incredible to watch him just go through, hey, this is why we're doing this, and this is why it's important. And he's built a team of incredible individuals. So we also were able to meet with Dr. Marty McCary. We were able to meet with Dr. Mehmet Oz. We were able to interact a little bit with Dr. Bhattacharya. And so, and then Kelly Means, as if you follow him, he's got some amazing research and policy ideas to move forward for the American people to make us healthy again. And I think truly, in America, we've had so much focus in our in NIH and in other federal programs on allopathy, and not on what does healthy look like? What is the norm? What is normative in health systems, right? And how do we keep people or help people attain health rather than constantly treating symptoms? And so I think these are really valuable conversations to have for Americans. We need to be able to preserve life, but also make life worth living for those who maybe are facing chronic illness or disease. So I think they're going to do some great things for America.
So he was a great person to be around, I take it then. Very knowledgeable. Very productive. So he's not what the media is laying him out to be then.
Not in my opinion.
That's great to hear. All right, well, the final thing I wanted to hit here was obviously the biggest thing in media right now are tariffs. Tariffs are huge. There's a lot of controversy behind them. I'm an importer myself. I import a lot of stuff from China. That's the prime crux of my business. So I understand what the pain is going to be behind those tariffs, and I understand why he's doing it. So I'm not necessarily against him. We're going to figure things out. I do understand that it is not cheap enough to build a lot of stuff here in the United States. The labor is too cost, materials are too high, and the competitive market's way too high. And it's gonna increase a lot of prices for the short term, but I think it's going to come back down over the long term, or China's going to buckle and even the playing field. One of those things are going to happen. But my main question for you is what are some of the effects you've seen that have hit Utah directly, and have you been confronted by any major businesses about the tariffs, or has that hit the legislature at all?
Yes, there have been conversations, and truly I don't think we know for sure yet what the actual negative impacts will be. I think there will be some negative impacts. I do think there's also some positive impacts to focusing on what are we critically in need of, but also dependent on other countries for. And one of those is, for instance, critical minerals, right? And we actually have a significant proportion of the total number of critical minerals in Utah that we could mine. And we're in conversations with our federal partners on making sure that we can get ongoing permitting and smoothing the way so that we can continue to mine and produce the means of production or the means of manufacture in the state of Utah for those things like chips that we're all dependent on, right? And you saw that Arizona is developing a large chip manufacturing facility. We have companies, for instance, White Mesa Mill is producing some of the rare earth elements in small but significant portions or small but significant amounts to be sold in the global market. And there's no reason that America can't produce some of these things and bring the cost down to produce in America. And I think those are some of the positive effects.
The biggest hurdle is not necessarily that America can or cannot produce it. We know we can produce it. And I know there's a lot of people that like to produce it. It's the cost behind producing it versus the cost of just going overseas and getting it. Because there's a lot of products that I can buy, ship, bring it here, even pay some moderate tariffs on top of it, and it's still cheaper than what I could produce it for here in the United States. I mean, our costs here in the United States on everything has just gone through the roof. And I know a lot of it has to do with government regulations, but a lot of it has to do with just sheer the size of wages nowadays, insurance behind that, having to match FICA and all these other type of stuff. It just makes it all expensive.
Absolutely. And in Utah, we have really focused on really smart and thoughtful and methodical deregulation where we can. We still have work to do, and we'll continue to do it to make sure that we are deregulating. We've also lowered taxes significantly in the state over the last 5 years, around $2 billion. And we want to continue to do that as well.
I don't know what California's going to do because they're just making it worse because with their minimum wage increases.
Yes, the mandatory minimums and things like that.
I think everything's just going to go robotic out there. They're just going to go.
And I don't disagree with you. I think the point I'm trying to make is that, for instance, with critical minerals, we don't want to be dependent on one country because that one country with an adversarial relationship, that cost could go through the roof. Or we could see, an impact on our quality of life here in America where we just can't obtain the product.
Well, I saw how Trump, the increases really affected Taiwan and that chip plant coming here. That was one of our biggest national security problems is having that foreign and China going there and just taking over. Mm-hmm. And then NVIDIA and these others are our main sources of those. And that's a huge security problem, a national security problem, big problem. And by him forcing these tariffs and bringing that stateside, then that just eliminated that national security threat. China can't all of a sudden just shut that off.
Yep.
Just shut that off.
And cause prices to...
Yeah. So I knew exactly what he was doing when he was doing there, but he's affecting a lot of other things as well. Again, I don't have any problems with it. As an importer myself, I don't have a problem with it. My costs are going up when I'm paying tariffs. But it's... The equal thing and the nice thing about tariffs is it's equal across the board. So if I'm paying it, my competitors are paying it. So it's just, but we're also going back to my Chinese factories and we're telling them, okay, we'll take some of this thing, but you guys are eating some of this too. And we're negotiating lower prices, which is what it's meant to do, is us to go back and beat them up. And obviously they don't want to lower their prices because then that's where they go to their government and say, hey, they're beating us up over here. We're not making anything anymore. You got to get rid of these tariffs because they're beating us up on our prices. And I think that a lot of Americans are failing to see that yes, the costs are going to go up. We're going to have to increase our costs, but us as importers, we're also going over there and we're beating them up as well, saying, okay, we're not eating the entire tariff. You guys are going to have to eat some of it. We'll have to share the expense, but we're beating them up.
You make some really good points, and I'm not arguing for or against. I think we're in a gigantic game of chicken, honestly, with a bunch of other countries. And it's just interesting to watch Trump work, to try to drive the deal. And when I say we don't know because we have.
Have you seen any major problems with any Utah companies that have?
I think that
have come to the legislature
yes.
and asked for help.
And not necessarily asked for help, but made us aware that there are some concerns for the supply chain and for their.
What industries are you think going to be most affected here in the state?
I probably shouldn't say. I wouldn't want to out any one industry that maybe is looking down the road and seeing potential problems. And I know that they're also looking for alternative suppliers and looking elsewhere around the world. So it'll be interesting to watch how it all shakes out. I think, business owners are really smart and really
we become
motivated.
innovative when we're in
figure
a
it
crisis,
out.
and I'm
Yeah.
excited to see what great things may come out of this.
I would say just for the normal everyday Utahn, right? Like my dear husband kept coming upstairs and showing me our stock accounts every day. And that got pretty depressing during the downtimes. But no, they're back up for now and we'll see what happens. But I guess,
Well, that's just where businesses, as business owners, we figure
the
it out.
panic,
We
yeah.
figure it out. It might go down for a little while, but once we figure it out, we adapt. Then it's just going to go back up again. I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah. But I would just say and I told Seth, stop looking. Just turn it off and don't look for a while. Let's just let it settle.
Well, just know that your person's buying low for you right now.
there you go.
and
Yeah.
hopefully
There
it'll
And hopefully everybody's buying in right now. Because again, business owners will figure it out. We'll go someplace else, or we'll beat them up a little bit. But I was just curious to see if there's any major effects that have happened here in Utah. Because I know the few businesses that I've talked to and a few fellow business owners I've talked to, but they're all kind of the same opinion as me. Like, yeah, but I know there's a lot bigger companies than I am. I'm just a tiny little company that could have had a lot more severe effects, because little guys like us, so we're a little more nimble. We can move a little bit faster. We can negotiate more. And bigger companies, it takes a little bit more of them for them to move, to veer in different directions. So it's a lot harder. They got a lot more weight behind them that they got to move around. It's like we're a little small car and we're zipping in and out of stuff, and they're a big old locomotive, and you can't really stop that on the dive or even change directions very well.
Yeah, the scale is very different.
The scale is very, very different. So I was curious if you knew of any major businesses that had any major effect here in Utah. But again, you don't have to out them either. So
We're so lucky to have you in our state of Utah, and we're so grateful. But
well, one last question. How did you become the majority whip? How did that happen?
That's a great question. And maybe I could go back to, you remember when I said I'm kind of a reluctant elected official, but a wholehearted patriot and public servant? And to really drill down into what I mean by that, the founders in the Federalist Papers talked about public virtue and private virtue, and that's something that I really I emphasized with my children when I was teaching them about our country. And we, as Americans, should both be privately virtuous. We should make good choices, moral decisions, but also the public virtue is that willingness to sacrifice for the greater good for everybody in our society. And I feel like I can give back. I've had the wonderful opportunity to raise 6 children. My youngest is 20, and I have 8 grandchildren. And so I'm at a time in my life when I can give back and serve others and really try to make government less of an enigma and feel less like we have an adversarial relationship, but more like, not that I would ever want to make government the answer for anything, because it isn't, right? But we have to have government for very good and legitimate reasons, and we should make it the most responsive government to the people that we possibly can. And so anyway, I don't love being in elected office. It's because I'm the type of person that just pours my life into something. When I'm all in. And so I work more than full time for the legislator's salary, which is about $17,000 a year. And
despite what it says on the internet.
You're talking about my campaign account, not my actual income. But I bought a car a few years ago after an accident. I had to replace an automobile, and this is kind of I think illustrates the point. I bought a car with 6,000 miles on it, and within 2 years, I have 100,000 miles on that car, over 100,000 miles. And it's because I'm driving all over the state. Next week, I'm going to St. George to talk to a group of Republican women, right? Like, I want to be there for the people of Utah and give back. So to your question about why or how did I become majority whip? So when I got into the legislature, I just decided I'm here to serve, and I'm going to do the very best I can in that, while the voters will have me in this position. And so I just made up my mind to do that, and to have a really good attitude, and to love everybody around me, and to be the very best person I can while standing for principles and having a backbone. And I think if you ask pretty much anybody in the state of Utah, they will say, yes, she has a backbone. And you really cannot bully Karianne Lisonbee. And I am proud of that fact. I stand by my principles, but I also am pragmatic enough to see what is possible and to practice that radical incrementalism that I mentioned before. So when I was first elected, I served for 2 years, and then I was reelected by the voters, and I was appointed by the speaker at that time to be the chair of the Judiciary Committee. And it generally, in the beginning of your second term, you're not made a committee chair. So it was an honor to be appointed to chair the Judiciary Committee, and I spent 3 years chairing the Judiciary Committee, and that was amazing, an amazing time of learning and growing and stretching. And I'm not an attorney, and I don't have a legal background, but I learned so much about our criminal justice system and the civil law in Utah and our courts, and so it was just a fabulous opportunity for me. And then I was appointed by the speaker to serve in appointed leadership, which there are 9 members of our leadership team in the House in Utah out of 75 members in our body. There are 5 appointed members of leadership and 4 elected members. So he appointed me to be the Vice Rules Chair, which meant I was on the leadership team, and I realized that the impact of the things that I could do on the team was more than I could do off the team. And so I determined that at some point, if an opportunity arose, that I would run for elected leadership in the body. And so I did. I served in that capacity for, I think, a year, maybe 2. I need to go back and journal this all out so I can remember. But then a seat opened up, and I ran along with some members of the body for an open seat in elected leadership, which was the assistant majority whip. And I won. And then when Brad Wilson decided to run for the Senate and resigned, that then kind of created a domino effect. And so I decided to run for majority whip, and I won. So I'm majority whip now for this term. And so I was elected by my colleagues in the House Majority Caucus. And it's just been an honor to give back to them.
You had to have developed quite a bit of trust amongst your colleagues for them to put there. So, I mean, you had to have stood out. Well, obviously, you're standing up for your values. You have some backbone. Those are all great values to have, and that's why we as constituents want you there and have you there.
Well, we've had 2 elected officials already on the program who have both mentioned
just raved about you
and how you have mentored or helped or been a resource for them.
That's so nice.
Yeah, they've all said that you're the greatest mentor out there and everything. And but it goes to show your character, though.
She has a flaw.
All right.
What time is it? Just kidding. Okay, what's my flaw?
She cannot shuffle cards
to
save
true.
her life.
But I am practicing, and I'm getting better. Do you know, I played Texas Hold'em last night, and I won.
You did?
Yes.
Well, I'm impressed.
Thank you.
Well, we'll have to play.
You can't get the shuffle down.
I don't know why my hands do not do that very well, but
they just kind of go everywhere.
You just spit
It's
them out
sad.
over the room.
But you know, if that's where her
Are
flaw
you
is going to
bending
be,
too
what
much
would
where
I
they're all bent out of shape?
Ingrid is right. That is a flaw. I'm sure I have many other flaws, but it has been wonderful to be able to serve so many good people, to see the hearts of the elected officials in Utah, even the ones that maybe we don't agree on policy, but they are in it for the right reason. Their heart is
Well, they've got to
there.
see some genuineness in you as well, because even if you don't see eye to eye and they're still voting for you, then they see fairness and genuineness in there at least. So I would definitely take that as a high honor to be able to be the majority whip. But
It is. It's a high honor, and I'm honored to be able to defend my colleagues. Even the colleagues that I don't agree with, I often will stand up and defend when I see the opportunity, because I know where their hearts are and they're in the right place.
once you became the majority whip, and you are now in control, right? You're the one running things, and you have to.
The speaker's running things. I'm just helping, but
Yeah. Well, you still got. You got some pretty good position there. So you're going out in front of the media for the first time as the one that's got next to the speaker, the next one that's got to be the voice, right? How was that first experience of going out there and being the majority whip in front of the media?
It's interesting. I think I'm the first female majority whip in the state of Utah, and the media reaction to that has been very interesting. But there are some really good reporters out there who truly try to tell the story in an unbiased way, and I have really enjoyed my collaborations with them in trying to get the word out.
That's good. Have you faced a lot of national media that's not been so good? Or?
There have been some, national media reporters that have reached out. Very often, I will just ask for the questions in writing and respond in writing, rather than many try to get a gotcha moment, and I'm just not interested in that.
The recording, the gotcha moment.
Yep. So.
Very, very, very wise when it comes to the national media.
Well, thank you for all you're doing with this podcast and getting the word out about our great country. And so I just really appreciate your work, both of you.
Well, we absolutely enjoy the podcast. It's even better to get to know our elected officials, help the public get to know the elected officials. And I learn a lot more than I thought I was going to learn from just asking just simple questions. So I find it incredibly interesting myself. So I greatly appreciate the guests and greatly appreciate you spending your time here. I know how busy you've been this last week, but I'm sure everybody appreciates that greatly.
Happy to do it.
Appreciate you for being here. This is God and Country, and we will see everybody next week.